Okay, well that was successful. Using the soldering iron on those screws, softened up that lacquer or glue or whatever it was, and allowed me to get those screws out. Now I'm putting these carefully aside because I don't know that all of the 6 screws will be the same length. Now the screws at the top and bottom here, hopefully they'll come loose without any fights. That's better. Okay. I'm laying these screws out on the bench in the positions they came from. So hopefully I can, if there's any difference in length or something, I'll be able to tell and make sure they go back in the right place. The 2 black screws look shorter than the nickel plated screws. They are, but there's not a lot in it. Okay, so that's that. I'll just crank this focus forward. So I want to lift and get out these shims, and I need to make sure I know where the shims came from. So that's the shims from the right side of the camera. And I'll measure those and make a note. 0.79, 0.17. And on the other side of the camera, I'll do the same. Point 80, 0.40. So there's certainly a difference from one side of the camera to the other. Looking at my screws, the 4 nickel plated screws and their washers are all identical, except 2 of them are a little bit covered in the remains of the lacquer. But that I will hopefully clean all away before I put it back together. And the 2 black screws were slightly shorter, they went in the lower positions. Okay, not so much more to come off here now. I'm going to take the coupling off for the parallax correction. I note that's got a brass washer and a large head on the screw. That should allow me to lift the front standard out of there now, I think. The lens standard. It does just about. What's catching me up? Oh, my coupling for the film shutter cocking. Under here there's a single screw head screw I can take out there. That screw head is Got quite a fine thread on it by the looks of it. Yes. And I can take my lever off. I'll pop that screw back where it came from for the moment, so I don't lose it. Right, so what have I got? Well, here's my lens standard with the shutter and lens assembly on it, and I know that needs serviced. Here's the camera body. Now the focus we know is bad, that there's something odd here. You can certainly see it there. As I hold this piece steady, that doesn't move at all in my fingers. This piece, you can see it twitching up and down. So there's certainly problems with this, and I've got to resolve that. Now I've got more shims under here. Have I? No, I haven't. Oh, that's okay. I thought I was looking at shims, but that's basically just the polished top of the casting. Right, I'll pop the camera body to one side. I want to look at the lens and shutter assembly. The cocking arm here, that's a bit of an odd arrangement. I assume that's to take a certain amount of slack out of the system. It's quite interesting. It's a really funny arrangement. I don't remember seeing that anywhere else. I'm going to remove the shutter from here, so I need to disconnect my flash contact. And I'm retreating to smaller size screwdrivers for the first time. That screw is actually a little bit loose. That's probably not a problem. I'll take that screw out. It's got no washer on it. Here we've got our wire, the tag on the end, and there's an insulating washer. That ensures that their connection is solely to the inside of this flash connection on the shutter body itself, which just looks like a normal flash PC connection, except it's threaded. Okay, so I'll pop those pieces carefully to one side. And the shutter is probably just held in now with a retaining ring, and it's got two little holes inside that tube to engage a tool. Sometimes you can just get these with your fingers. This one's a bit tight for that. I mean, I'd rather use my fingers if I could, because I don't want to risk damaging anything, but I'll go and get a tool. Because those holes are right at the external perimeter of that piece there, that tube, I can't really get a traditional lens spanner down there. The tips are just the wrong size. But I've got this pair of mutilated circlip pliers that'll do the job nicely. That came loose without a fight, so I can unscrew that. Okay, now I've got to be a bit careful about how everything's arranged. So that tube there, that's just screwed on. You see it's got a bit of a shoulder, so it locates things on the back. Now, let's see if this shutter will lift out. Well, that ring fell off the back there, so I've got to make note of that. This arm here is coupled with a spring to this point. So I'll uncouple that spring. It might be easier said than done. Now I'm going to twist it to get it out. Okay, now I can lift this off. Underneath my shutter I have this lever. Underneath that lever there's another metal ring, spacer. That's it, nothing else to fall off there. Looking at the shutter, there's another retaining ring here, and that holds down this ring here, and that ring there, that cocks the shutter. Okay, so I'll need my lens spanner now to unscrew this collar. Let's try this. Okay, that came loose easily enough. Now this collar that's screwed on here, I've got to check and see how that goes on, because it may not be symmetrical both sides. It may have a deeper recess on one side than the other. If I take that off, I can have a look. Okay, so on the outside surface, the one that goes towards the plate, I've got 2 steps in that, and only 1 step on the face that goes towards the shutter. Those shoulders are for things like this to move around. So having taken note of that, I'll now be able to put them back in the correct order. If you don't take careful note of that when you're taking things apart, you have to go through the tedious process of wondering which piece went where and which shim went where and which piece went which way up, and it gets a bit tiresome. Okay, well this lever's held on there with a single screw, so I'll take that off just because I don't want a big flapping lever there while I'm working on things. Of course it doesn't want to come loose. Let's support that on something. That's better. I'll put that screw back where it came from. So I don't lose it. Here's our shutter proper. Now this is the sort of thing that you, regardless of what camera you're working on, this is what you're going to be looking at. Now the front and rear groups will be just screwed in. Now they're tight. I'm going to try a friction tool on those first before I do anything else. Let's try this front group. Yep, that came loose. Had to use a fair bit of downward pressure there to get enough bite, but that did come loose. And I'll put that lens very carefully to one side. I'm just making sure that the front surface is well recessed before I put it face down in a container out of harm's way. Now the rear group, I'll be doing much the same with this. So let me get onto that. Oh, that one came loose easily by comparison. Now this one, again, I've got to look carefully at this piece. Now the glass is right, it forms the front surface here, so I can't put it face down on anything, so I'll be putting it down on the glass. I'm looking at the rear, and I need to see whether that surface is, whether the glass comes forward of the mount or not. So I'm just judging that. No, the glass is recessed back in the mount, so I can put that down like that without touching the glass. So that means I can put that lens down safely. So now I can deal with the shutter itself. So it gives me a chance to have a look at this thing for the first time really. The diaphragm is quite stiff. Those blades look a little bit oily. The shutter was giving us all the same speeds at the slow speeds. B works nicely. I'm not getting anything there. So certainly the shutter needs a little bit of attention, I would say. Right into it. I've got a screwdriver here reduced to 2 points to engage with that little locking rivet, which I can rotate so that the flat is towards the lens tube, and that allows you to rotate this, and that will allow me to lift the front piece off. Okay, so that piece, let's get these two pieces separately. That plate there is bayoneted on to the lens tube, and this latches it to stop it from being rotated. This is our shutter speed settings cam plate. It's quite sticky with old grease. In the shutter itself, this shutter is much the same as the shutter you'd find in a Retina 1A or 2A camera. I'm going to unhook this spring. I'll zoom you in a little bit, you can hardly see anything. I'll unhook this spring from the latch that would hold the shutter in the cocked position. I'll unhook this spring here, which is on the main spring for the shutter. This is called the main lever, this piece. Here's our retard gear train. Now I said that I thought this was jammed, and as you can see this pallet lever hardly moves at all, and the lever at this end, the arm, is jammed. So that speed train is absolutely jammed solid. Okay, well I'll just dismantle the rest of this. I'm going to take that little lever there, that's the coupling for the aperture setting. I'm just going to take that off, that tip, because it's going to make it awkward for me to get pieces in and out otherwise. So I'll put it and its attendant screw carefully to one side. Saying that, I'll just about flick the screw off into the bushes. Right. The shutter release lever here will probably just lift out, I would think. The spring on this is a weird shape. Don't be tempted to square it up or make it look a prettier shape. It's probably not the right thing to do. This is our B lever. This is the lever. This is all very sticky. See how slow that oozes back to position? This is all very sticky with oil or grease. Our B lever is held in here. It's got a little spring on it. That spring also has another function. Apart from swinging the B lever about, it also holds the latch in place. Get that to one side. This latch here forms part of the action that holds the shutter in the cocked position. This is our flash sync mechanism here. That's all released. I've got two screws here. One of them is a shoulder screw at this end, but this is a MX flash sync lever. This would be a little green lever on a Retina 2A camera. Here it doesn't need to look pretty because all the connection is on the outside. And that's just a plain screw. Now I'll release its return spring, lift that from the post. Take that plate off. Two brass standoffs. Take that spring out. Lift this off. This is two pieces. It's only held together with a very fine spring. That'll all need to be cleaned because everything here is a bit sticky. I'll remove the flash, the screw that holds the moving flash contact down, and its operating arm. Take out this spring. This spring is our 500th of a second speed spring. The shutter has this extra spring to provide the top speed. The flash sync mechanism here, this cam should lift out. It doesn't want to. It's very sticky. Now I'll leave that until I'm further into the mechanism. I think it probably will lift off that post. I'm going to undo this single screw that holds our flash contact mechanism into the housing, and this should be able to gently lever this up out of the way. Just have to get the tip of the scalpel under there because the gap's quite narrow. Okay, so that levered up gently with a screwdriver. That's our flash contact. You can see those shutter blades oozing back to position. That's a bit of a problem. They're covered in oil, those blades. Okay. I'll split the shutter case. To split the shutter case, I've got to remove the three screws from the back that hold the mechanism plate and the shutter case together. Now these screws are all identical, so you don't need to make note of where they came from. Okay, so here we've got our shutter split in half. Here's our case with the diaphragm for the aperture settings. That's very, very sticky. Here's our mechanism plate with the shutter blades visible on it. We'll put the mechanism plate to one side for the moment. I'm going to disassemble this. Now, starting here, there's two notches in this cover, this plate. If you rotate your aperture setting lever to the right position, it exposes the screw heads that hold the settings lever through to the moving plate. So I'm supporting this on the edge of the wooden block so I'm not distorting anything. Loosen those two screws. Our settings lever comes away. I'll recover those two screws. Those shoulder screws, and unlike anything else on the shutter. Now with that all out of the way, with that lever no longer providing any resistance, I can check the diaphragm and see if the diaphragm itself is sticky. And fortunately for us it's not, which tells me that most of the stickiness was due to dried out grease on the back of that settings lever here. This all has to come apart to be cleaned. There are 3 small screws. One of them is a countersunk head screw, the other 2 are plain. Now that screw was loose, that's not a good thing. And tip that lot out. Now we've got our case. Here's our moving plate. Our diaphragm blades, which are quite oily but they're not sticking together to any great extent, that's good. And of course the 3 screws. So all of this I've now got to clean with naphtha, cigarette lighter fluid. And you can probably see in that case, it's difficult with the contrast, I know, but there's a lot of filthy brown waxy grease looking rubbish at the back there. That all needs to be gone. That all needs to be very clean. So I'll just put that lot to one side. Let's have a look at the shutter mechanism plate and the 5 shutter blades. Well, the blades are quite oily. If I hold this upside down, they should of course just fallen off. Gravity's got a grip even on little things. But they didn't because they're stuck together with oil. Here, let's have a look at this. First of all, this little gear from the flash sink, is that going to come loose or not? Yeah, it is. It was just simply gummed on there with oil. From the top, this screw here, now this, see how that oozes back into position slowly? This stickiness is all to do with this mechanism plate. And take that screw out, unhook the spring, lift that arm off, check the mechanism plate here. This is the blade actuating ring and it's very stiff. That doesn't move very smoothly at all. That's a nuisance. That's why one of the reasons the shutter doesn't work properly. The screws that hold it in place, these are often very tight. There are 4 screws, 3 of them are short, 1 of them is long. This is the long one. You can either take photos or put a little tick mark on the frame here so you know where the long screw goes back. I'm keeping strong downward pressure on my screwdriver to ensure that the screwdriver doesn't cam out and damage those screw heads. If they got too mutilated, the edges might get turned up slightly and they might catch on shutter blades and cause you problems. Right, so off with this retainer. That looks quite oily. And the blade actuating ring itself, this is the piece that as it swings backwards or forwards, it swings the blades inwards or outwards. And that gets us down to this speed train, which is absolutely clogged up and jammed. Now I would far rather clean this on the mechanism plate than disturb it, because if I disturb it from the mechanism plate, I've got to set up the adjustments again, and the adjustments are awkward. Now this is quite sticky. But it is freeing up. So I'll put this down on a piece of paper. And I'm going to give this a squirt with some CRC Lectra Clean, because that is a far more aggressive solvent than the naphtha. And I'm interested in softening up that sticky grease that's holding this all together. This shouldn't just ooze back into position, that should snap back into position. But when I hold that out with my thumb like that, I should be able to swing this arm inwards and outwards. If I can swing it now, I couldn't move it at all before. And that should just zoom back into position under the action of the return spring. It's doing none of that. This I'm going to have to give some extended cleaning to, because, oh, that's better. That's how it should work. This arm still doesn't move as quickly as it should do, but the rest of the mechanism is. Let's get that, check that again. I'm going to have to give this, that's much better. That's exactly as it should work. Now that was just simply oil which has got into places it shouldn't have been in, and basically over time the oil basically, I don't know, it oxidizes or something. Anyway, it all turns to sticky rubbish, and actually oil will go like a lacquer and actually glue things together. That's all moving fairly well now. I'm going to continue on giving this more cleaning with the CRC Lectra clean. I could try this with naphtha, but I can just tell that it's so gummy that it probably wouldn't make much of a dent in it. Until I've got this working smoothly, reliably, and then I'm happy that I've washed away any of those old contaminants, because I don't want a situation where I have a speed train that is nicely lubricated with naphtha at the moment, but as soon as the naphtha has evaporated, it leaves behind the sticky rubbish that was there to start off with, to go back to its old job of sticking things together. I want all that sticky rubbish out.